Drop a lit match into jet fuel. It goes out. That single moment quietly broke everything engineers thought they understood about aviation safety. If fire can't sustain itself in the direct presence of fuel, something deeper is happening than simple chemistry. Aviation didn't arrive at this by accident. It was forced there, by explosions that shouldn't have happened, by wings that would have torn themselves apart under their own weight, and by a 16-year argument over whether to replace a liquid. Most people assume kerosene is just a practical choice, a cheaper alternative to gasoline. Something aviation settled on by default. That assumption is wrong on almost every level. This is the story of why the most sophisticated flying machines ever built depend on a fuel that refuses to burn easily, and why that fuel lives inside the wings. Early military aviation ran on JP-4, a wide-cut fuel blend engineered for performance, not stability. Its flash point sat around -18 degrees Celsius. In practice, that meant one thing: JP-4 was always trying to become vapor. Even sitting in a fuel line at normal flight temperatures, and fuel doesn't burn as liquid, it burns as vapor mixed with air. One spark was enough. A static discharge. A wiring fault. Friction in a fast-moving fuel line. No warning. No time. Just ignition. Aircraft didn't need to crash in the traditional sense. Sometimes they simply stopped existing because a fuel-air mixture formed in the wrong place at the wrong moment. Engineers weren't theorizing about risk. They were watching it happen. Investigations kept pointing back to the same root cause: not mechanical failure, not pilot error, but a fuel that was too eager to ignite. So they asked a brutal question: what if the fuel simply refused to ignite easily in the first place? The answer arrived in 1952. The Navy developed JP-5, a high-flash-point kerosene built specifically for carrier operations. Not for performance. For survival. Picture a carrier deck. Aircraft packed tightly together. Fuel lines running in every direction. Heat radiating off the deck surface. Hundreds of people moving in close quarters, and open ocean on every side. A fuel spill in that environment isn't just a spill. It's a chain reaction waiting for one spark. One moment of carelessness, one equipment fault, and an entire flight deck becomes unrecoverable. JP-5 raised the flash point dramatically, keeping fuel stable under conditions that would have turned JP-4 into a catastrophe. That single property, stability, changed naval aviation permanently. The Air Force held on to JP-4 for decades longer. Replacing a fuel across an entire global military fleet means retraining crews, rebuilding supply chains, and retesting thousands of aircraft operating across dozens of countries. The transition began in 1979. It didn't complete until 1995. 16 years to replace a liquid. That timeline tells you everything about how deeply fuel defines an aircraft. Commercial aviation was watching closely, as airlines began flying long transoceanic routes, where an emergency landing wasn't always an option and hundreds of passengers were depending entirely on the aircraft holding together. The stability of kerosene made it the only rational choice. Gasoline was never seriously considered for these routes. The military's hard lessons became the foundation commercial aviation built on, and the fuel that kept carrier crews alive became the same fuel that keeps passengers safe at 35,000 feet today. Fire safety solved one half of the equation. The other half lives at altitude. At cruising altitude, outside temperature drops to around -56 degrees Celsius. The air is thin. The cold is sustained and relentless. And inside fuel lines, something quiet can go wrong. Fuel can change phase, from liquid to vapor, before it ever reaches the engine. No explosion. No warning light. Nothing dramatic at all. A pilot might glance at the instruments and notice engine speed dropping, slowly, steadily, while the aircraft continues forward at full cruise speed, the passengers below completely unaware that propulsion is quietly fading. At 35,000 feet, there is no runway nearby. No margin for a slow response. No second chance built into the geography. Kerosene stays liquid across that entire temperature range, from a summer runway baking at 40 degrees Celsius to the sustained cold of the upper atmosphere. It doesn't destabilize. It reaches the engine consistently, hour after hour, from takeoff to the final stretch of a 12-hour transoceanic flight. That consistency isn't a convenience feature. It is survival engineering. Now here's the part most people get completely wrong. The assumption is that fuel sits in the wings because wings are large. Space is available. The fuselage is occupied by passengers and cargo. That reasoning sounds logical. It is almost entirely incorrect. Think about what's actually happening to a Boeing 777 at cruise altitude. The wings are generating enormous lift, upward force distributed across their full span. The fuselage is carrying enormous mass, downward force concentrated along the body. These forces don't cancel evenly. They meet at the wing root, the structural junction where the wing connects to the fuselage. That point is under relentless bending stress for the entire duration of every flight, every takeoff, every turbulence event, every landing, decade after decade of accumulated cycles. Now imagine removing all the fuel from the wings, storing everything in the fuselage instead. Lift is still pulling the wing tips upward, but now there's nothing pushing back along the wing's length. The structure is fighting itself. Progressive overload builds at the exact point engineers work hardest to protect. This is why every large commercial aircraft has a certified structural limit called maximum zero fuel weight. It defines precisely how much the fuselage can carry when the wings hold no fuel. Exceed it and the aircraft doesn't fail immediately. It accumulates structural fatigue at an accelerated rate until failure under load becomes inevitable. You've probably heard of aircraft circling after takeoff before returning to land. That's partly this. The structure needs the fuel load reduced before it can safely absorb a landing. It isn't an air traffic delay, it's the aircraft's own engineering setting the terms, and the crew following them without exception. The fuel in the wings isn't energy waiting to be burned. It's active ballast, working against bending forces that exist precisely because the wings are flying. And it doesn't just sit there. Fuel moves continuously throughout every flight. Automatic transfers between wing tanks, center tanks, and trim tanks keep the aircraft balanced as weight shifts with every gallon burned. Without that, a drifting center of gravity would increase drag, force the engines to work harder, and accelerate fuel consumption. Some aircraft can even jettison fuel mid-flight in emergencies, a controlled structural decision, not waste. When landing overweight poses risks greater than the cost of what's released over the ocean below. Propulsion, structural reinforcement, aerodynamic balance, stability management. 4 functions. 1 substance, operating silently, automatically, on every single flight, while the passengers read, sleep, and look out the window, completely unaware of what's happening inside the wings beside them. So return to that match. Drop it into jet fuel. It goes out. That reaction isn't a curiosity. It's the physical signature of decades of decisions shaped by real failures and an environment that punishes every wrong assumption. Jet fuel doesn't just power aircraft. It stabilizes them, balances them, and holds their structure together, simultaneously, silently, on every flight. Engineers didn't design it to be elegant. They designed it to survive conditions where failure has no recovery. The elegance is what happened when they got it right. The wings don't just carry the fuel. For a significant part of every flight, the fuel is carrying the wings.